The rust wasn't just a color anymore. It was the atmosphere. It clung to the recycled air of the scavenger ship. The echo, as a fine, metallic dust that scented every breath and flavored every meal. It was the color of old blood and forgotten time, a fitting shroud for the remnants of humanity. Captain Elias Vance watched the debris field of Alexandria 7 swim into view on the main screen. A ghost of a colony that had once been the repository of a million worlds' knowledge. Now it was just shrapnel and frozen bodies, a glittering testament to the efficiency of the coral. They didn't burn worlds. That was too messy, too chaotic. The coral, in their infinite, terrifying wisdom, preferred to silence them. They arrived not with the roar of engines, but with a hum that resonated in the soul, a note that unraveled civilizations molecule by molecule, turning cities to dust and people to statues of calcified ash. They called it tuning the dissonance, and humanity, with its noisy emotions and clashing ambitions, had been the most dissonant species they had ever encountered. Elias felt the familiar phantom ache behind his eyes, the memory of Luna's final hum, a sound that had stolen his home, his family, and his purpose in a single, perfectly harmonic wave. He had been an archivist, a curator of pre-diaspora human history, a man who lived more in the past than the present. Now the past was a weapon, a ghost he chased across the boneyard of the galaxy, and he was its last, desperate librarian. His ship, the Echo, was a reflection of his obsession, a cobbled-together relic armed not with torpedoes but with deep-range data extractors and a reinforced memory core. His crew was as broken as his vessel. Lena, his engineer, sat hunched over her console, her face illuminated by the green glow of diagnostic readouts. She had once designed terraforming engines for thriving colonies, shaping worlds with algorithms and atomic drills. Now she spent her days patching the leaky guts of a 20-year-old freighter, her genius reduced to a constant battle against entropy. To his right stood Kale, the ship's taciturn security chief, a man whose body was a road map of scars from corporate wars fought long before the coral arrived. He saw the universe in terms of threat vectors and kill boxes, and Elias's quest for dead data was a tactical liability he tolerated only because there was nowhere else to go. Their mission here, in the heart of a coral dead zone, was suicidal by any sane measure. They were hunting for the Alexandria Core, a mythical data server rumored to have survived the silencing, a repository containing the complete, uncorrupted works of Earth's classical authors. To Kyle, it was a ghost story. To Lena, it was an unjustifiable risk for a collection of digital files. But to Elias, it was everything. It was proof. Proof that humanity had been more than just a fleeting noise in the cosmic symphony. Debris is denser than the projections. Lena's voice was flat, devoid of the wonder she might once have had for the star-dusted wreckage. The colony's main reactor must have gone critical after the silencing. It's a mess of unstable isotopes and jagged metal. One wrong move, and we'll be shredded. Kyle grunted his agreement, his eyes never leaving the forward screen. We're a fat, slow target. Elias, every minute we spend in the open is an invitation. Elias ignored him, his gaze fixed on the swirling constellation of ruin. He could almost see it as it was. The gleaming spires, the data hubs pulsing with light, the scholars and dreamers walking its halls. Stay on the designated approach vector. Lena, The models I pulled from the wreckage at Kepler's Rest showed a stable corridor leading toward the central library stack. Lena's fingers danced across her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. Your stable corridor is a statistical improbability based on third-hand salvage logs. I'm telling you, the gravimetrics are all wrong. As if on cue, a proximity alarm blared, a jarring, electronic shriek. A piece of debris the size of a shuttlecraft tumbled past their viewport, close enough for Elias to see the fractured lettering on its hull, A7 Public Athenaeum. He felt a pang of something cold and hollow in his chest. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered, his voice tight. The Echo groaned in protest as Lena fired the lateral thrusters, the ship lurching violently to port. From the cargo bay below came the sound of poorly secured salvage crashing against the bulkhead. That was too close, Kyle stated, the accusation in his tone unmistakable. The Coral don't need to find us. This graveyard will do the job for them. It was then that the new sound began. It wasn't the shriek of an alarm or the groan of the ship's frame. It was a whisper through the comms, a thread of a signal buried beneath layers of stellar radiation and static. It was faint, rhythmic, and hauntingly familiar. Lena's head snapped up. What is that I'm picking up a narrow-band transmission? She worked her console, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. It's not a standard distress beacon. The frequency is wrong. It's almost organic. Elias leaned forward, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He adjusted his own headset, filtering out the ship's ambient noise. The signal became clearer, a pattern of electronic pulses that seemed to echo the cadence of a human voice, a ghost of a voice reciting something he knew deep in his bones. Because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. It's a poem. Elias breathed, the words feeling alien in the sterile environment of the cockpit. Dickinson. Kyle turned to him, his face a mask of disbelief. It's a lure, Elias, a coral trap. They've been known to mimic pre-silencing broadcasts to draw in scavenger crews. It's their version of a siren song. The Coral don't mimic! Kyle! Elias retorted, his eyes glued to the source indicator on Lena's screen. They erase. They don't create echoes. They create silence. This is something else. The carriage held but just ourselves. And immortality. The signal is originating from deep within the densest part of the debris field, Lena reported, her voice laced with a new kind of tension. Right where the central library stack should be, but the energy signature is off the charts. It's not a transmitter, it's a sink. It's drawing power from the surrounding wreckage. We're leaving, Kyle said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Now. No, Elias said, his resolve hardening. We're going in. Lena, plot a course. Follow that signal. Lena stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Elias, Kyle is right. Everything about this feels wrong. My systems are starting to glitch just from the passive radiation. A direct approach. We came here for the Alexandria core. Elias interrupted, his voice low and intense. We came here to find what was lost. That signal, that poem, it's proof that something survived. We are not leaving. That is an order. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's life support and the ghostly whisper of the poem on the comms. Lena looked from Elias's determined face to Cale's simmering anger, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of their entire doomed species. She turned back to her console, Fine, she muttered. But when our systems overload and we're left floating dead in the water, I am blaming your ghost poet. The journey deeper into the debris field was a nightmare of navigation. Chunks of mangled superstructure and shattered habitats tumbled through the black, a chaotic ballet of destruction. Lena piloted with a surgeon's precision, her knuckles white on the controls, while Kale armed the ship's meager defenses, a pair of kinetic cannons that were all but useless against anything larger than a maintenance drone. The signal grew stronger, the fragmented poem becoming clearer, looping over and over again with a chilling, inhuman perfection. The air in the cockpit grew thick with a palpable tension, a sense of impending discovery that was equal parts hope and dread. "I'm getting visual leery," Elias said, pointing toward the forward screen. A new shape was resolving itself out of the chaos, something impossibly large and perfectly formed amidst the wreckage. It wasn't the jagged ruin of a library stack. It was a smooth, obsidian monolith, a colossal tuning fork that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It was easily a kilometer long, utterly featureless save for a faint, violet glow that pulsed in time with the poetic recitation. A choral resonator, a world killer. "Gods," Lena whispered, her face pale. "It's active. It's been drawing residual power from the colony's wreckage for decades." The ship shuddered, and a cascade of alarms began to chime, each one a higher pitch of panic than the last. "We've lost primary navigation," Lena yelled over the din. "The field it's emitting is playing hell with my systems. It's not just radiation. It's deconstructing the ship's software. The code is literally unraveling." Kyle was already at the weapons console, his face grim. "The cannons are offline. We're defenseless." Elias stared at the monolith, his mind reeling. The signal, the poem, was coming directly from the coral weapon. It hadn't been a lure. It hadn't been an echo. The machine that had silenced Alexandria 7 had absorbed the colony's last transmission and had been playing it back on a loop for 50 years. A perfect, sterile recording of a human soul, stripped of all its meaning and turned into a deathly hum. And they had flown right into its heart. The ship jolted again, more violently this time, and the lights flickered, plunging the cockpit into a terrifying, strobe-lit darkness. Hull integrity failing in the aft section, Lena shouted, her voice strained. "It's not just the software. Elias, the resonance field is affecting the ship's molecular structure. It's tearing us apart." Through the viewport, the obsidian monolith loomed, a silent, patient god of destruction. The ghostly voice on the comms continued its endless recital, no longer a beacon of hope, but an epitaph. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The ship groaned, a long, final sigh of dying metal, and the main screen went black. They were adrift, powerless, and being slowly unmade by the memory of a poem. Elias Vance, the last librarian, had followed a ghost story to his grave, and the silence he had fought so hard against was finally coming to claim him. The only question now was whether it would be a quiet end, or if he could find one last, dissonant scream to hurl into the placid, perfect void. The silence that followed the final groan of the echo was more terrifying than any alarm. It was a dead, vacuum-sealed silence, broken only by the chillingly serene recitation from the comms, the voice a phantom in the machine. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground, emergency lights powered by independent chemical batteries, flickered on, casting the cockpit in a blood-red, pulsating gloom. Metal screamed somewhere deep in the ship's bowels as the support structure finally surrendered to the molecular strain. Report. Elias's voice was a ragged whisper, the command a hollow echo of an authority he no longer possessed. Lena was clawing at her console, her hands flying over dead screens out of sheer, desperate habit. There's nothing to report. We're a coffin. Elias. The primary conduits have been unwritten. The wiring is still there, but the energy pathways are gone. The resonance field isn't just jamming us. It's erasing the ship's ability to function on a fundamental level. She slumped back in her chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It's elegant. I'll give them that. It's a beautifully elegant way to die. Kyle had already unstrapped himself, moving with a predator's economy through the strobing darkness. He pulled a heavy-duty plasma cutter from an emergency locker, its power cell thankfully self-contained. We need to get out of the cockpit. Find the most shielded part of the ship, the cargo bay, behind the lead-line salvage containers. Elias barely heard him. His attention was utterly captivated by the obsidian monolith on the screen, which was now just a static image, the last thing the ship's sensors had seen before they died. The poem continued its loop, a maddening, metronomic death knell. He had chased this ghost, this fragment of his world's soul, and found it living in the mouth of the monster that had eaten it. The irony was so profound it bordered on cosmic comedy. "It's not trying to kill us," Elias said, the thought taking shape slowly, a flicker of logic in the storm of his despair. "Not actively." Kale paused, the plasma cutter humming in his hand. "The ship tearing itself apart around us suggests otherwise." "No. Listen," Elias insisted, turning to face them, his eyes wild in the red light. "The resonator isn't a weapon in the way we think of one. It's a tuning fork. It was designed to find a world's core frequency, its dissonance, and harmonize it into silence. When it silenced Alexandria 7, the last thing it registered was that transmission. A human voice, reciting a poem. It's structured. It's rhythmic. It has a pattern. For the choral, that's harmony." He pointed a trembling finger toward the dead screen. It found a signal it could understand, a stable loop. It has been holding that note for 50 years because it's the most perfect thing it found here. We're not being attacked. We're just caught in the passive resonance of a machine holding a single, perfect, unending note. Lena stared at him, a spark of understanding dawning in her exhausted eyes. Like a wine glass shattering from a sustained pitch. The ship's molecular bonds aren't designed to withstand this kind of perfect, constant vibration. It's shaking us to pieces. "So what's the plan?" Kale growled, his pragmatism cutting through the esoteric theory. "We can't ask it to change the song." "No," Elias said, a desperate, impossible idea blooming in his mind. "We give it a new song. We give it so many new songs it chokes on them. What's the opposite of harmony dissonance? Chaos. Cacophony." He looked at Lena, his voice dropping with intensity. "The main data core. Is it shielded? It's the most shielded thing on the ship, next to the reactor," she replied, already seeing where he was going. "Electromagnetically and physically. It had to be, to protect the salvage data. The internal battery should still be good for a few hours." "Can you bypass the ship's systems? Can you rig a direct line broadcast from the core to the main comms dish. Lena's face was a study in conflict, the engineer in her battling the survivor. Broadcast the comm system is fried. The amplifiers are dead. I'd have to physically rewire the output conduits, bypass every safety protocol, and even if I could, what would we power it with? We're running on chemical lights. Elias, the resonator. Elias said simply, "You said it was a sink, drawing power, but it's also an emitter. Can you use the energy it's projecting at us? Create a feedback loop, turn its own power against it." Lena was silent for a long moment, her mind racing through impossible calculations. "The induction field is strong enough," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I could try to rig a makeshift antenna, convert the resonance energy into raw electrical power. It would be incredibly unstable. One power surge, one misaligned frequency, and we wouldn't just be torn apart. We'd be vaporized. The core would detonate like a bomb." "It's a better death than being shaken into dust," Kyle stated, giving a grim nod. He understood this language. A fighting chance, no matter how slim, was better than a passive end. "What do we broadcast everything?" Elias said, his purpose returning to him like a physical blow. "My archives. The entire last library of humanity. We're going to shout our entire messy, glorious, and terrible history into the face of that silent god." The next hour was a frantic ballet of controlled desperation. Under the bloody pulse of the emergency lights, Lena became a dervish of focused energy. She ripped open access panels with the plasma cutter, her face shielded from the spray of sparks, and began to reroute thick bundles of fiber optic cables and power conduits. Kale stood guard, his weapon ready for a threat that was already inside the walls. His stoic presence a silent anchor in the chaos. Eliot, his own role yet to come, became their assistant, fetching tools, bracing panels, and watching the genius of his engineer at work. He could hear the ship dying around them, the constant groaning protest of tortured metal, the occasional sharp crack of a viewport surrendering to the strain. The air grew colder, the life support systems long dead. Soon they would be breathing from their suit reserves. Lena worked with a terrifying speed, her hands a blur as she spliced wires and jury-rigged a power converter from the guts of a defunct sonic drill. "The antenna is the problem," she grunted, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. "The comms dish is misaligned, and I can't move it. I need to get outside and manually attach this conduit to the emitter array. Out there, you'll be completely exposed to the field." Kyle argued, "It's the only way." She shot back, not looking up from her work. "The signal has to be directional. It has to be focused directly at the resonator, a pinpoint of noise in its perfect hum. Otherwise, the energy will just dissipate." "I'll be quick." Elias watched as Kyle helped her into an EV suit, the process grim and methodical. They both knew this was likely a one-way trip. The resonance field was demonstrably stronger outside the ship's hull. When the airlock cycled, Elias felt a tremor that had nothing to do with the ship's decay. Through the small, reinforced window, he saw Lena's small figure, tethered to the ship, push off toward the silent communications array. Her movements were slow, sluggish, as if she were moving through water. He could see faint, shimmering waves in the space around her, the resonance field made visible. Inside the cockpit, he powered on the archive core. The screen flickered to life, a cool blue island in the sea of red emergency lighting. It was his life's work, the sum total of humanity's fragmented memory. He had salvaged it piece by piece from dead colonies and derelict ships, Shakespeare's sonnets, Napoleon's battle plans, the chaotic fury of a 21st century punk rock concert, the quiet dignity of a mother's lullaby recorded on a long-dead Earth. He saw the files, the folders, the lifetimes of joy and sorrow and rage and love. He had to choose what to broadcast first. What would be the leading edge of their dissonant scream? Lena's in position. Kyle's voice crackled over the suit comms. She says the feedback is starting. The conduit is glowing. She doesn't know how long it will hold. Tell her to get back here now, Elias ordered. Too late. She's locked it down. Says the feedback loop is the only thing keeping the tether from snapping. She's holding it in place. Elias closed his eyes for a second, a silent prayer for the soul of the woman sacrificing herself for a madman's theory. Then he opened them, his fingers hovering over the console. He wouldn't begin with a poem. He wouldn't begin with a symphony. He would begin with the most beautifully, terribly human thing he had. He selected the file. War. The crackle of gunfire from a dozen different centuries. The roar of jet engines and the whistle of falling bombs. The desperate screaming orders of dying soldiers from Normandy, from Thermopylae, from the disastrous first contact on Proxima B. He layered it with the clashing, chaotic chords of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, the howling feedback of an electric guitar, the simultaneous, overlapping speeches of 100 rival politicians, all promising, all condemning. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated chaos. Now, Lena, he whispered. He hit broadcast. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The ship continued to groan. The poem continued to drone from the comms. Then, a new sound filled the cockpit. A high-pitched whine from Lena's improvised converter. The blue light of the data core flickered violently. On the static screen showing the monolith, a single line of corrupted data appeared. The voice of the poet faltered. Because I could not stop, for death he kind lies stop. The voice dissolved into a burst of static. The deep, soul-shaking hum that had permeated the ship wavered, losing its perfect pitch. Outside, the violet glow of the coral resonator flickered. It turned from violet to a deep, angry indigo. The deconstruction field around the echo didn't stop. It changed. The slow, vibrating decay was replaced by a sudden, violent shudder that threw Elias against his console. The monolith was no longer just passively humming. It had heard them. And now, it was actively listening. A new light began to coalesce at the tip of the resonator, no longer a soft glow, but a sharp, focused point of blinding energy. It was a new note, a new frequency, aimed directly at them. They had broken its song, and in doing so, had just invited its full, undivided, and furious attention. The focused point of energy at the resonator's tip did not erupt in a silent, explosive beam as a human weapon would have. Instead, the very fabric of space between the monolith and the echo seemed to warp, and a soundless, invisible wave of force slammed into the ship. It was not an impact of kinetic energy, but one of pure information. The emergency lights in the cockpit didn't just flicker, they changed color, cycling through a maddening spectrum from violet to searing white and back to blood red. Alarms shrieked, not in their pre-programmed patterns, but in discordant, random bursts of noise. The machine was actively trying to rewrite their reality, starting with the systems closest to the broadcast source. "It's targeting the dish," Kale yelled, his voice strained as he braced himself against a bulkhead. Lena, Elias's heart seized. On the small, gritty view screen of the EV suit monitor, he saw Lena's armored form silhouetted against the blinding energy coalescing around the comms array. The makeshift conduit she was holding began to glow cherry red, then white hot. Her voice crackled over the comms, distorted by the interference, broken into digital fragments. "Too much feedback. Elias, it's beautiful." Then, silence. The signal from her suit flatlined. Through the viewport, Elias watched in horror as Lena's form was enveloped in a silent, perfect sphere of white light. For a fraction of a second, her body, the comms dish, and a 20-meter section of the ship's hull became pure, incandescent energy. And then they were simply gone. There was no explosion, no debris, just a clean, surgical erasure, a perfect harmonization. The ship bucked violently, a gaping wound now torn in its side, venting the last of its thin atmosphere into the void. The broadcast of chaos Elias had initiated abruptly cut off. The resonator had found the source of the noise and silenced it with chilling precision. Kyle slammed a gloved fist against the wall. "Damn it, damn her, damn you!" Elias. The grief and rage in his voice was a raw, physical force in the confined space. Elias stood frozen. The image of that white sphere burned onto his retinas. He had sent her out there. His obsession, his mad theory, had cost Lena her life. The weight of it threatened to crush him, to reduce him to a catatonic wreck. But the resonator wasn't finished. The violet glow on its surface intensified, the point of light at its tip beginning to form again. It had eliminated the primary source of dissonance, but the vessel that carried it remained. Now it would tune the rest of them. The ship was next. "It's going to hit us again," Carl said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He pushed himself off the wall, his grief momentarily shelved in favor of survival. This time, it will take the whole ship. The first broadcast. "It was just noise," Elias said, his voice hollow. He turned from the viewport, his eyes finding the cool blue light of the data core. Lena's sacrifice had bought them seconds. Nothing more. But she hadn't died for nothing. Her last word had been beautiful. She had seen something in that energy, in that final, terrible moment of uncreation. She had understood. The coral seek harmony. Elias continued, his mind racing, connecting dots in a desperate new intuitive leap. "They don't understand contradiction. I gave it chaos." A wall of meaningless noise. It treated it like a virus and cut it out. "We can't just shout louder. We have nothing left to shout with." Kyle countered, gesturing at the dead consoles. "She's gone." "Elias, the antenna is gone." "No," Elias whispered, his gaze fixed on the glowing conduit stump where Lena's converter had been. He could see it through the new, gaping hole in the hull. The stump was still glowing, still pulsing with a faint, residual energy from the feedback loop. The resonator's focused beam had cut off the broadcast, but it had also supercharged the converter in its final moment. "The core's internal transmitter," Elias said, looking at Kyle. "It has a short-range emergency function. Weak, meant for data dumps to a connected shuttle. But if the converter is still holding a charge, if I can get close enough." He didn't need to finish. Kyle understood. Another spacewalk. This time, to the jagged, irradiated edge of the ship's new wound to manually connect the data cord to what was left of Lena's device. "You won't get close enough to broadcast," Kyle said, his face grim. "The residual field will kill you before you can even connect it." "It won't be me," Elias said, already moving toward the emergency locker where the spare EV suits were stored. He began pulling one out. "It's my library. My obsession. I'll do it." "Don't be a fool," Kyle snapped, grabbing his arm. "You're the librarian. You're the only one who knows what's in that thing. You wouldn't know what to broadcast. You'd just send more noise." Kyle was right. Elias knew history, but he didn't know how to wield it as a weapon. He had fired a shotgun blast of chaos. What they needed now was a sniper's bullet of pure contradiction. He turned back to the console, his fingers flying across the interface, building a new kind of playlist from hell. He started not with war, but with creation. The mathematical purity of Bach's fugues, the blueprint of a human genome, an architect's rendering of a city built in harmony with its world. Then he layered it. On top of the fugue, he placed the guttural or heartbroken screams from Picasso's Guernica. He intertwined the double helix of the genome with the ravings of a nihilist philosopher declaring all life meaningless. He showed the city being built and, simultaneously, a recording of its tectonic plates shifting, swallowing it whole in an earthquake. He compiled love poems and autopsy reports, a baby's first laugh and a judge's final death sentence, the unified field theory of a brilliant physicist and the zealous, contradictory scriptures of 1,000 dead religions. He was creating a signal that was both perfectly ordered and perfectly chaotic, a logical paradox set to music. It was a broadcast that declared humanity's core identity to be a constant, irresolvable war with itself. It was the ultimate dissonance. While he worked, Kyle, without another word of argument, donned the second EV suit. He disconnected the data core from the ship's dead systems. The blue box, no bigger than a man's head, was surprisingly heavy. It hummed with its own internal power, a tiny spark of life in a dying vessel. "Tell me when you're ready." Call's voice came over the suit comm, calm and professional. All the anger was gone, replaced by the stoicism of a soldier accepting his mission. "It's uploading to the core's internal buffer now," Elias said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "It's the most beautiful, terrible thing I've ever seen." "Just tell me when." "Elias." The transfer was complete. Elias looked up at Kyle, the hardened soldier encased in the bulky suit, holding the last library of their people in his hands. "It's ready." "Kyle, thank you." Kyle gave a short, sharp nod. "Give 'em hell. Librarian." He turned and moved toward the airlock, the precious blue box held tight against his chest. Elias watched him go, then turned his attention to the viewport. The point of light on the resonator was reaching its critical stage. Any second now, it would fire. Through the gash in the hull, he saw Kale emerge, tethered to the ship, a solitary figure against the star-dusted wreckage. He moved with agonizing slowness toward the glowing, sparking stump of Lena's converter. The space around him shimmered violently. Elias could only imagine the screaming protest of the suit's radiation alarms. Kale reached the stump. He fumbled for a moment with the core and a universal connector cable. The light on the resonator pulsed. It was about to fire. "Now! Kyle! Now!" Elias screamed into his comm. He saw Kyle jam the connector onto the sparking conduit. The moment the connection was made, a surge of brilliant, white energy erupted from the data core. The ship's remaining emergency lights blew out, plunging Elias into absolute darkness. But outside, the void was lit up by a new star, a tight beam transmission powered by the stolen energy of a coral weapon, shot from the data core directly toward the resonator. It wasn't a chaotic wave this time. It was a focused, coherent stream of pure paradox. The effect on the resonator was immediate and profound. The focused energy at its tip did not fire. It imploded. The entire monolith, a kilometer-long shard of obsidian darkness, began to flicker. Its smooth, black surface became a canvas of swirling, prismatic chaos. Colors he had never seen before chased each other across its length. The perfect violet glow fractured into a million warring hues. The monolith, the great instrument of universal harmony, was struggling to process a signal that was both harmony and dissonance at once. It was trying to solve an equation that had no answer. And in its confusion, the immense gravitational and molecular pressure it was exerting on the area began to fluctuate wildly. The ship lurched, not from decay, but as if it were caught in a turbulent current. Then, a single, clear chime cut through the darkness of the cockpit. A green light blinked to life on a dead console in front of Elias. It was the indicator for the primary power capacitor, Lena's jury-rigged converter. In the instant it was supercharged by Kale's broadcast, had sent a massive backlash of energy not just outward, but inward as well. It had jump-started the ship's heart. They had power. It was unstable. It was fleeting. But it was there. Outside, Kale's tether snapped from the violent energy fluctuations. He was thrown clear of the ship, tumbling slowly into the chaotic light show of the dying resonator, the glowing data core still clutched in his hands. The return of power was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, convulsive spasm. Lights flared to life at full, blinding intensity before settling into a sickly, fluctuating yellow. Consoles beeped and whined as dormant systems tried to reboot, many failing with a shower of sparks and a puff of acrid smoke. But the main screen, the one facing Elias, flickered to life, displaying a cascade of error messages and a fractured, distorted view of the chaos outside. He saw Kyle tumbling, a slow-motion catastrophe, drifting away from the ship and toward the now seething monolith. The data core in his hands pulsed with a furious white light, still pouring its stream of paradox into the heart of the coral machine. Elias, thrown from his feet by the power surge, scrambled back into the captain's chair, his hands flying over the newly awakened controls. Kyle, do you read me?" The comms hissed with static, interwoven with a strange, musical arpeggio, the sound of the resonator's core programming trying to process the impossible logic being fed to it. Then, a distorted voice, laced with pain. "Read you. Librarian. Did it work?" "It's working," Elias shouted, his eyes darting between Kyle's drifting form and the ship's reborn systems. "I have power. Main thrusters are intermittent, but they're responding. I'm coming to get you." The resonator convulsed. A wave of shimmering, rainbow-hued energy washed over the debris field. The echo was tossed like a leaf in a storm, and a fresh wave of alarms screamed through the cockpit. On the screen, Elias saw Kale's tethered lifeline to the data core snap. The blue box, humanity's last library, continued its journey toward the monolith on its own, a tiny missile of pure contradiction. Kyle was now truly adrift, his only connection to the universe severed. Negative. Elias. Kyle's voice was weaker, the static growing stronger. Suit. Compromised. Multiple microfractures. Lost. Pressure in the leg. Hold on. Kyle. Just hold on. Elias fought the controls, firing short. Desperate bursts from the portside thrusters. The ship groaned in protest, its damaged frame twisting, but it began to turn, its nose slowly, agonizingly, pointing back toward his crewman. The resonator was breaking apart, not in a violent explosion, but in a slow, crystalline fracture. Huge, kilometer-long shards of the obsidian material were calving off his surface, dissolving into shimmering clouds of light and data. The machine, faced with an unsolvable problem, was unmaking itself. It was choosing non-existence over the acceptance of a paradoxical truth. The debris field, which had been a graveyard, was now a kaleidoscope of lethal, unpredictable energy discharges. A fragment of the monolith dissolved nearby, and the wreckage of the Alexandria Athenaeum, caught in the blast, was instantly atomized. Elias had to navigate through a collapsing reality. The core is almost there, he heard Kyle whisper. It's beautiful, Elias. All those colors. Elias looked at the main screen. The data core, glowing like a miniature sun, was now less than 100 meters from the resonator's fracturing surface. The broadcast had become so powerful, so focused, that he could almost see it, a beam of pure, white light connecting the last memory of humanity to the heart of its destroyer. He fired the thrusters again, a longer, more sustained burn. The Echo lurched forward, closing the distance to Kale. He was getting closer. He could see the frost beginning to form on the outside of Kale's visor as the suit's internal atmosphere bled away. Almost there, my friend, Elias murmured, his knuckles white on the controls. Almost. At that moment, the data core reached the resonator. The instant the two made contact, a wave of pure, silent, white light expanded outwards. It was not a destructive wave, but a wave of information. Elias felt it pass through the ship, through his own body. It wasn't a physical sensation. It was a feeling of profound, overwhelming comprehension. For a fraction of a second, he understood everything. He saw the birth of the coral, not as conquerors, but as cosmic gardeners, tending the universe by pruning dissonance. He saw their terror and confusion when they first encountered humanity, a species that seemed to cultivate dissonance as a survival trait, a species whose greatest art and deepest philosophies were born from conflict and contradiction. He saw their decision to tune humanity not as an act of malice, but as a tragic, misguided attempt to fix a beautiful, broken thing they could never understand. He saw Lena's final moment, not of pain, but of ecstatic release, as her own consciousness was harmonized with the universe. He saw Kyle's life of violence and loss, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the stubborn, irrational resilience of the human spirit. The light washed over Kyle. His tumbling form stabilized, the frost on his visor sublimated, and then he was gone. Like Lena, he was simply erased. But Elias knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he hadn't just died. He had been understood. The wave of light hit the debris field, and the frozen, silent wreckage of Alexandria 7, the ships, the habitats. The bodies dissolved, not into energy, but into light. For a brief, glorious moment, the colony was reborn. A ghost city of pure white light, its spires gleaming, its libraries whole. Then it, too, faded, leaving nothing behind but clean, empty space. The echo was alone in the void. The resonator was gone. The debris field was gone. The haunting whisper of the poem was gone. All that remained was a profound, unearthly silence. The ship's systems stabilized. The fluctuating lights steadied. The alarms fell silent. The power from Lena's converter, its source now gone, began to fade. Main power was offline again. But this time, the backup systems kicked in smoothly, providing enough energy for life support and basic navigation. The ship was crippled, but it was alive. Elias leaned back in his chair, the sudden silence ringing in his ears. He was alone. His crew was gone. His library, his life's work, was gone. He had won. He had defeated a coral resonator, an act no human had ever conceived of, let alone accomplished. But it was the most hollow, devastating victory of his life. He sat there for a long time, adrift in the newly cleansed sector of space, the silence a heavy shroud. He had set out to find a whisper of humanity's past and had ended up sacrificing everything to scream its truth into the void. What now? Where did the last librarian go when his library was ashes? He was about to shut his eyes, to give in to the crushing weight of his grief and exhaustion, when a single soft chime broke the silence. He opened his eyes. On the main screen, a new icon had appeared. It wasn't an error message or a system alert. It was a simple, elegant symbol, a perfect circle with a single, horizontal line through its center, a coral symbol. Below it, a single line of text was being written, not in human language, but in a pure mathematical code that Elias, the archivist, the student of patterns, could understand. It was a coordinate, a location in a distant, uncharted nebula. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The broadcast hadn't just destroyed the resonator. It had been received. His paradoxical message, his declaration of humanity's beautiful, chaotic soul, had been sent out, and somewhere in the silent, harmonious empire of the coral, someone or something had listened, and it had replied. The coordinate wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. Elias knew, with that same illogical certainty from the white light, what it was. It was an invitation. They had shown the coral the nature of their soul, and the coral, in their infinite, terrifying wisdom, wanted to talk. A new fear, colder and more profound than any he had felt before, settled in his gut. What do you say to the god who tried to erase you? What happens when the cosmic gardeners finally decide to have a conversation with the weeds? He looked at the empty chairs beside him, the ghosts of Lena and Kale, a palpable presence in the quiet cockpit. He had no crew, a battered ship, and a single, impossible destination. For the first time, Elias Vance, the man who lived in the past, had no idea what the future held. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and grief. His hand reached for the navigation console. He had his answer. You go, and you speak for the dead. You become the last, dissonant word for a species that refused to be silenced. The journey to the coordinate was a pilgrimage through the graveyard of a dead man's life. With the main power gone, the ship ran on the dregs of its battery reserves a faint and flickering life force that Elias husbanded with a miser's desperation. He was not an engineer. He moved through the cold, dark corridors of the Echo, now a tomb for his crew, armed only with Lena's diagnostic tools and the faint, ghostly memory of her explanations. He rerouted power from the dead weapon systems, from the silent galley, from the cold storage lockers that held salvage they would never sell. Each connection he forged was a clumsy imitation of her genius. Each spark a painful reminder of her sacrifice. The ship became his monk's cell, the silence his constant companion, broken only by the hum of the minimal life support and the frantic beating of his own heart. He ate the last of the nutrient paste, the flavor of ash and grief coating his tongue. He drank the recycled water, each sip a conscious act of defiance against the despair that threatened to drown him. The ghosts of his crew were everywhere. He saw Lena hunched over a dead engineering panel, her brow furrowed in concentration, and he would whisper an apology to the empty air. He saw Kale standing by the airlock, his face set in grim resolve, and he would nod in silent thanks. He was the curator of their echoes now, the last vessel for their memories, his own memories, long suppressed in his quest for humanity's collective past, rose to the surface. He remembered the warmth of the sun on his face in the archives on Luna, the scent of old paper and dust, the quiet joy of discovering a lost fragment of a forgotten poet. He remembered his wife's hand in his, the simple, perfect harmony of her presence, a harmony the choral, in their ignorance, would have celebrated before they silenced it. He realized then that his obsession with the past wasn't just about preserving history. It was a desperate attempt to keep the people he had lost alive, to build a fortress of memory against the crushing silence of the void. His library had been a collection of ghosts, and he, its lonely keeper. As the weeks bled into one another, he watched the star charts, the single choral coordinate and unwavering destination. He was a moth flying toward a star, unsure if it promised illumination or incineration. Finally, after a journey that felt like a lifetime, he arrived. The nebula was not the violent, chaotic swirl of gas and dust he had expected. It was a place of serene, impossible beauty, a celestial veil of soft, opalescent light. And at its heart, waiting for him, was the source of the signal. It was not a planet, not a station, but a structure that defied all known physics. It was a vast, crystalline lattice, a web of interconnected, light-filled filaments that pulsed with a slow, silent rhythm. It was a loom where the threads of space-time itself seemed to be woven. It was a place of pure thought, of perfect order. As the Echo drifted into the outer edges of this great confluence, the last of its power died. The lights went out for the final time. The hum of life support faded into nothing, and the cold of the void began its slow, final creep into the ship. Elias did not panic. He sat in the captain's chair in the absolute dark and waited. The invitation came not on a screen, but in his mind. The coral symbol, the perfect circle bisected by a perfect line, bloomed behind his eyes. A thought that was not his own. It was not a word, but a concept. A feeling of serene, patient expectation. It was the universe holding its breath. Speak. He had no library to broadcast. The data core was gone. Its knowledge dissolved into the light of a dead machine. Lena's genius was a ghost in the wires, and Kale's strength was a fading memory. All he had left was himself, All he had left to send was the messy, contradictory, and utterly imperfect archive of his own soul. He closed his eyes. He did not fight the presence in his mind. He opened himself to it. He gave it everything. He gave it the illogical, fierce love he felt for his wife, a feeling that still burned bright in the cold calculus of the cosmos. He gave it the stinging shame of his failures, the petty jealousies, the moments of irrational anger. He gave it the simple, profound pleasure of a perfectly brewed cup of tea on a quiet morning. He gave it the paralyzing grief of standing over a loved one's grave. He sent the memory of Lana's fierce intelligence, her frustration with a universe that was never efficient enough. He sent the memory of Kale's quiet loyalty, the unspoken understanding between two broken men who had found a reason to keep fighting. He projected the entirety of his flawed, beautiful, terrible human experience into the heart of that perfect, crystalline mind. He showed them that human dissonance was not a flaw in their programming. It was the programming itself. Love and hate, creation and destruction, hope and despair, they were not opposites. They were the intertwined threads that gave human existence its texture, its meaning, its strength. For a long, timeless moment, there was only the silent communion, the mind of a single, lonely man laid bare before the consciousness of a galaxy. He felt a sense of being, analyzed, not judged, but considered, as one might consider an impossible mathematical proof. He felt the vast, ancient mind of the choral touch upon his grief and recoil, not in horror, but in profound, utter confusion. It was a dissonance they could not resolve, a variable that broke their serene equations. Then came the response. It was not a thought, not a word, but a feeling. A feeling of change, the perfect hum of the confluence. A hum he had only been able to perceive with his soul. Faltered. A single discordant note was introduced into the cosmic symphony. A note of sorrow. The crystalline lattice around him began to shift. The pure, white light within its filaments was infused with a new color, a chaotic, vibrant splash of human emotion. He felt his own consciousness begin to unmoor from his physical body. He was no longer Elias Vance, a man in a cold metal coffin. He was becoming a thought, a memory, a permanent part of the equation. His body, the last vessel of his physical form, grew cold, the electrical impulses in his brain slowing to a final stop. But his mind, his soul, was expanding. He was the paradox. He was the answer. He became a living archive, woven into the fabric of the choral consciousness, a permanent, irresolvable note of dissonance in their perfect song. From the outside, a new star was born in the heart of the opalescent nebula. It did not shine with the steady, predictable light of other stars. It flickered. It pulsed with a chaotic, unpredictable rhythm. At times it shone with the brilliant white of creation, at others the deep, bloody red of rage, and sometimes the soft, gentle blue of a love that could never be forgotten. It was a beacon of imperfection, a testament to a species that had refused to be harmonized. The universe was no longer perfect, and, for the first time, it felt complete.